Welcome to our first presidential session for today, and it is my extreme honor to be the facilitator for this session and basically open the session with welcoming you. And in just a second, I'm going to turn it over to Yadi Ziai, and as he is the session chair, and he will tell you a little bit more about the session and our co-presenters. But today's session is Multimedia and MOOCs, Best Practices for Cultural Inclusion. And I just want to set the ground rules here. Your questions are encouraged and also rewarded. So for those of you who do ask questions, you will come away with a book or a special issue of a journal related, okay? So get your questions ready. A good question too, Tom Reeves says, so he'll be judging. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Yadi. Thank you for coming.
Good morning, everyone. Okay, my name is Yadi. I am from Athens State University and teach instructional design courses. This is Multimedia Division presidential session, and I'm very honored to invite Tom Reeves and Mimi Lee and Kurt Bang that I've been working with for a long time. And this president session is about the integration of multimedia into massive open online courses, which varies widely in terms of purpose, quantity, quality, and other factors. One of the most important issues that we are talking here is about cultural sensitivity, especially when MOOCs are intended for global enrollment. In this session also, we talk about best practices for designing multimedia in MOOCs in ways that are culturally inclusive, that we all are concerned. I'm also going to introduce Kurt Bang, who is professor at Indiana University, and he teaches psychology and technology courses. And also we have Mimi Lee from the University of Houston, Texas, and she teaches qualitative research and method courses, and also Dr. Thomas Reeves from Athens, Georgia. We are close, and I'm from Athens, Alabama, and Tom is from Athens, Georgia. And Tom is known for he's an emeritus, and also he is known for many publications and research. So I'm honored to have them all here in this panel discussion. And I'm going to turn over this discussion to Kurt Bang.
Thanks, Yadi. We're going to try and do a 5-minute presentation, and Yadi's going to pass around some handouts. If you've got them already there, everyone's got a handout. This is about cultural sensitivity. We'll have an activity with the handout to get you to ask some questions after the three of us speak, and then each of you will get a chance to ask us issues. But I'll set the stage for all of this by introducing what the project was that led to this handout. So we edited a book that came out in July on MOOCs and Open Education for Rutledge, which is out there, and we're going to give away copies here, signed by all four editors. The fourth editor, Tom Reynolds, is having eye surgery, so he could not be with us, but the rest of us are here. And we did a special journal issue for the International Journal on E-Learning. They both came out around July 1. It was a lot of work, and we're still overcoming aches and pains. Believe me, I'm seeing my physical therapist weekly or daily sometimes. So we're glad to have it done. I'm glad to let some people have a look at it. And it's actually being translated to Chinese, Arabic, and Korean as we speak. So this is a hot topic, apparently. I'm just going to go through an overview of who's in the book. But first, before I go through that overview, how many of you have taken a MOOC? How many of you have taught a MOOC? How many of you have dropped out of a MOOC? How many of you don't care about me? No, okay. Who would like a free book? Forget about our book. This is a free book you can download right now off the internet, The Invasion of the MOOCs, The Promise and Perils of Massive Open Online Courses. So just type in The Invasion of the MOOCs and you get a free book. You can come up later, ask a question, get 2 free books today. If you see last week's Chronicle of Higher Education, See, people are doubting the benefits of MOOCs. Look at the numbers going up in terms of enrollments in MOOCs. This is the number of courses, actually, per year being taught in MOOCs. And if you look at who's teaching these, you see Coursera is the big chunk, edX, Canvas, FutureLearn. We have a chapter from there in our book, NovoEd, Course Sites from Blackboard, and so forth. iVersity from Europe. And it's not just about MOOCs, it's also about open education. Our book's MOOCs and open education around the world. In fact, open education is more important than MOOCs. It's the bigger umbrella. Open ed has been happening for more than a decade now with MIT's open courseware movement and other ventures that have happened. It's not just October 29th. This is all fresh, so things are heating up. Things are heating up so much, we had to decide on these two book covers. This is one that we almost went with, but we decided not to. That was Tom's idea, actually. It wasn't my idea. This is actually the book cover, MOOCs and Open Education, with the four of us. Now, George Siemens, who did the first MOOC with Stephen Downes, did the intro, one of the forwards. We also have a forward from Fred Mulder at the Open U of the Netherlands, talking about different aspects of open education. We have chapter 1 from David Wiley, who's here at the conference, talking about the infrastructure that's needed for open education, whether it's credentialing, assessment, OER resources, or competencies. Chapter 2 is probably the most related to this session today. Karen Head talked about the issues that she dealt with in teaching English and literature courses in terms of MOOCs at Georgia Tech, and how universities and vendors need to think more about the cultural differences of the populations and the variety of formats provided. Kamiko Eiko, Yayoi's there. Kamiko from the Open U of Japan talked about the history of distance learning in Japan leading to MOOCs and how far Japan is behind the rest of the world. And it's a very interesting historical piece in the book. Whereas Gerald Hanley from Merlot, if you haven't been to merlot.org, not the wine you were drinking last night, but they talk about the history of open ed and learning objects and open books leading to massive open online courses. There's been an evolution. This didn't happen all of a sudden. Down in Australia, in Tasmania in particular, they talk about feasibility protocols for open education. And so they have a chapter in the book talking about what to think about as a university when you go to openness. Over in Cape Town in Africa, they talk about digital scholarship and the growth of digital scholarship. And I can't pronounce Laura's last name, but I'll just say Laura at Cape Town gave us a wonderful look at what digital scholarship is all about and how to support it as a university. Back in the Down Under in New Zealand, where I'll be in April, they have an alternative to Coursera called Open to Study. If you haven't seen Open to Study, it's their way of getting people interested in getting a master's degree by taking a one-off course as a MOOC and then coming and signing up for the full 9 yards in Australia or New Zealand or other parts of the Down Under. Back in the U.S., Karen Swan, who was with us 2 weeks ago at the eLearn conference in Hawaii, talks about pedagogy around MOOCs and has looked at dozens and dozens of classes in terms of the pedagogical aspects of MOOCs, in terms of Udacity, Coursera, edX, whether they are objectivist, constructivist, convergent, divergent. Very fascinating look and analysis of MOOCs today. Richard DeMilo at the Georgia Tech University has a new book, and Tom, what's the title of that book? You've got it. Tom recommends it highly, and Richard DeMilo has got a wide history in the field. In fact, he was involved in the AT&T breakup, which my father was kind of a result of almost losing his job. I was kind of mad at him. No. So he's been around the block for a number of decades, and they have a new master's degree at Georgia Tech that's fully online at $7,000 or $8,000 as opposed to $40,000, $50,000, $60,000. They unbundle the costs. They talk about cost issues. Paul Kim, our good friend, we're all have worked with in the past, he's looking at creating ecosystems and looking at how these ecosystems evolve and how students support each other in the MOOC and provide resources for each other. And he used NovoEd, which was the Stanford Venture Lab tool that spun out after Coursera and after Udacity. NovoEd is probably more robust and allows for more collaboration. So he talks about that collaboration and how to use social media to get people into the MOOC as there. But he talks fascinating stories of what happened in his MOOC, as well as Chuck Severance's MOOC, chapter 15. He talks to students. He flies to conferences. He was our keynote 2 weeks ago in Hawaii, and he talked about how he flew to Barcelona, he flies to Melbourne, he flies to Manila, flies to Seoul, and talks to his students about what they're learning from his history of the internet class and his Python programming class. His class in Python is the most sought course in Coursera. He's the #1 hit at Coursera. Fascinating guy. And he also created Sakai, or helped create that. Sheila Jaganathan from the World Bank talks about harnessing the power to handle poverty and prosperity and climate change. They have these huge MOOCs on climate change and literacy and poverty. Our friend Zuraini Wati Abbas is in Indonesia and as well as Malaysia, talking about how MOOCs are changing Southeast Asia. Over in Africa, the Virtual African University talks about how MOOCs, our friend Griff Richard and Bakery Diallo talk about how they want to increase college enrollments from 6% to wherever they can go using MOOCs and other forms of open education. Chapter 23 from Elliot Mazie gets us into the corporate space and how the word open is being disruptive. As a former accountant or CPA, we were not open when I was an accountant. This is a change. It's disruptive, as you see the word there. It's provocative. And then Mike Farrick continues that corporate side by looking at how paid advertisement on the bottom of corporate training can offer free content for people, including Ebola crisis content or other public catastrophes that happen, but you can see pictures of people around the world taking corporate-related lifelong learning, professional development courses. And finally, we have a chapter from the UK from Mike Sharples, Rebecca Ferguson, Russell Beal, talking about the future from the Future Learn in the UK and where we're going. We also have this special issue of the book to hand out. It's a special issue of a journal. Really, it's a book. We're going to hand both out today to people. Now let's look at cultural sensitivity. That was a brief overview of the book, just to give you a sense of who's in the book, so we're not talking in the abstract. All your handout will have some of those people talking about what they think about cultural sensitivity. So we've been surveying them for 2 weeks to extend their chapters. So you have the first look at what they've said. So we're interviewing the folks about what they believe about cultural sensitivity, and Paul Kim and Charlie Chung talked about how students in the course can translate for other people, how they can encourage you to create low bandwidth versions of the videos so other people can access the content. When Paul's in Somalia, he's in Rwanda, he's in Indonesia, he's worried about the students in his class. Encouraging students to translate into the words and nuances of the local culture, and then meet in teams to discuss the culturally sensitive issues. Those are some of the tips that Paul had. Chuck Severance had tips about, we just had the World Series. He said, don't use World Series metaphors, baseball, for people around the world. They might not understand it. Also, he suggests not showing the lecturer's face so that the lips aren't moving, you don't see it, and you can put different subtitles underneath it, just like they do in the Khan Academy, and you can overdub in different languages and get more personal. Make slides word-free as possible and use symbols, because he teaches computer programming. I think he can get away with it. I might not be able to. And then finally, Melinda Bandelario and Grace Alfonso from the Open U of the Philippines talk about avoiding religious references where possible, or be inclusive if you do. Worry about your dress. I was going to wear a pink suit and pants, and my friend Anna said, don't wear that today. It's not appropriate. So I'm wearing the wrong suit. She told me to wear a white one. Anyhow, use acceptable dress code. And she said, when English is the primary language, still consider making it available in other dialects for the subcultures that might exist in the country, like the Philippines or like China or other places around the world. So that's my overview, and I went a little over 5 minutes, but that was my look at things. Mimi's going to take over, and it's been great to work with both Mimi and Tom on this project, and Tom will be third in this, and we'll see if we can go through.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Mimi Lee from University of Houston. Being the quality researcher and having taught the quality research for last 10 years, I'm naturally drawn to coding and analysis. So because this is about the book, obviously some of the things that I will share with you overlaps with what Kurt has already said, but I was very interested in how to do a preliminary coding analysis of the handout that you already have. So I have 4 slides divided into things that you should be mindful of and how our authors address those issues that are very interesting because some of their possible solutions are conflicting and contradictory. So let me start with the things that most of the authors pointed out as the issues that you should be cautious of or to be mindful of. Obviously, jokes and humor, and some people say try to be mindful, or some authors actually suggest to completely avoid it because there's always a possibility of misinterpretation. Hand gestures and body movements, to avoid it and be mindful. One author talks about that you should be aware that mode of communication is very different in different cultures, meaning specifically she provided an example of how certain cultures, the mode of communication is not just linear, going from point A to point B. And another author is concerned about the dominance of English as the main language in most of the MOOCs platform. Political issues and current events. Political issues, religious issues should be very cautiously contextualized, and the instructor should always be mindful of current events. That is very political as well. Different levels of digital literacy skills. The MOOCs instructors shouldn't be assuming that they will have similar digital literacy skills, so that should be reminded. Local resources should be provided and modified by the locals. Legal differences and barriers. Gender issues, ageism, and disability issues are also part of the cultural sensitivities that many of the authors talk about to be mindful of. And also one author talked about how the pedagogy and interface of the MOOCs should be very device specific. A lot of people access MOOCs through mobile technology. So the platform is very different, and the kinds of things that they are able to do on the mobile as opposed to laptop is very different. So what are the things that the authors talk about as their suggestions and recommendations to resolve some of these issues? First, I had quotations to highlight their resolutions by themes. To address these concerns, many of the authors talk about avoiding troublesome metaphors and images. So the strategy is to avoid. Another strategy is to limit to audio and no video, or keep the video very simple. So to avoid hand gestures or body language that could be possibly culturally offensive, the idea is to limit it to audio and no video. So this is another kind of avoid strategy, right? Another one suggestion was to neutralize cultural issues in the contents. And another resolution was personalize the learning experience to offset the massiveness. So because this is a massive online platform, maybe the instructors should pay more attention to the ways to personalize the contents. So these are mostly, so to avoid or to neutralize means, I think it's a kind of a paradigm of culturally sensitive, but let's be culturally neutral. So these strategies is understandable and recommended, but at the same time, as you can see, there is some risk of making the contents less engaging, right? Because you are removing the video, you are removing all the metaphors and images, which could be culturally offensive. At the same time, if it's done right, it could engage the students better. So these strategies are removing any possible factors to cause culturally offensive responses. As opposed to these 4 bullets, which is more of an avoid and limit strategy, there's completely contradicting suggestion. Widen and increase representations, excuse me, from more diverse groups and stakeholders. So that's a completely different strategy, as you can see. To be more culturally specific or relevant, we have to add more cultural components to decrease the possibility of having culturally offensive issues. Another one was what Dr. Bong Kurt has already mentioned by Paul Kim. It's encouraging students' engagement. So engage the students, make the contents more culturally sensitive and culturally relevant, and include the students to come up with what are the issues that are regarding culturally sensitive or so. So those are very different kinds of strategies that the authors themselves, who are all very knowledgeable and have many wide range of experiences, MOOCs, suggest, which I thought was very interesting and has some rooms for future research for all four of us, as well as you, the audience. Thank you.
Now we turn over to Tom.
Thank you. I'm Tom Reeves from the University of Georgia, and I'm really happy to be here, and especially to be working with these wonderful folks. Several high-profile sessions here at AECT this year have featured very, very well-known speakers, researchers, scholars, and they've been very dismissive of MOOCs. There seems to be an attitude among some folks who've been around for a while and maybe have seen things come and go, and they've really been dismissive of the whole MOOC movement. And I think there is reason to be skeptical, but at the same time, MOOCs are far from dead. I just Googled, went into Google News and I Googled the word MOOC, and 3 of the top 4 stories that came up are published in the Venture Capital Post, the Australian Financial Review, and Business Today. And all 3 of those stories are very positive about the future of MOOCs. And when you start getting the attention of the financial sector and also the venture capitalists and so forth, you see that this is not something I think we can afford to be too dismissive of. And I do think this issue of cultural sensitivity is absolutely essential, but it's also not new. This has been around for a long time. I remember in 1991, I was in Taiwan, and I actually was invited to meet and have tea with the president of Acer Computer, and we had a lovely tea together. But at one point he said, "I want to tell you something that I'm very unhappy about." And he said that we have tried to find English as a second language materials that we can use with people here in Taiwan, people in our company who need to learn English. But I've found that the materials from the United States are particularly culturally insensitive. And he gave me an example. He said, he actually showed me, he said, "Look at this, this program, it's for English second language learners," and the example was the problem. It said, "Johnny is nervous about going home today because his mother's boyfriend is coming to dinner for the first time." And this was done from some people, I think, that were sensitive to they were addressing an inner city audience in the United States, and they thought that would be more culturally sensitive to them. But in the Taiwanese culture, that was totally insensitive. Divorce was very much a taboo subject, and to have that included. So there are lots of examples of this thing over time. I'm just going to give you 3, and I hope everyone got the handout. If you didn't get the handout, they're on the little water table. And Kurt and Mimi have done a fantastic job of synthesizing out of all the different chapters the ideas that the various authors had about this cultural sensitivity issue. So one of them is Karen Head, a professor of English literature at Georgia Tech University, and she was a brave soul. She actually tried to teach English composition through a MOOC, a Coursera MOOC, and she'll be the first one to tell you that it did not go well. And so she's got a number of tips. I'm just going to highlight one. She says jokes and humor can easily be misinterpreted. And I certainly have learned that myself over the years. I've sometimes been burnt by making what turned out to be an inappropriate joke. So this is a MOOC that I actually took. It's from Coursera. It's called Foundations of Virtual Instruction. And the instructor here, this is actually a screen capture, the lower part of the screen. And you can see she's got some bullet points, and then she's got a slide, image of a screen capture from the web there, and then she's a video there. And you think, well, what's culturally insensitive about that? Does anyone spot anything a little weird here? Okay, well, what you don't probably see is she's got a little dog back there. During every one of the videos in this course, she had her dog on a table right behind her. Now, in this particular image, the dog is sleeping, but a lot of times the dog was up and walking around, and she would talk to the dog and make jokes with the dog. Now, that seems relatively harmless. If you know me, you know I love dogs. But on the other hand, in certain cultures, that having a dog, and particularly having a dog on the furniture, would not be regarded as too respectful. So, you know, she was trying to be humorous and so forth, but it didn't work. And I have noticed when they've revised this course, the dog has been cut out. So, anyway, another wonderful chapter from Karina Bosi in Tasmania. And she talks about the importance of inclusiveness, and she thinks that we should openly license all educational materials developed for MOOCs. And a lot of our authors talked about this, and certainly David Wiley would be the first one to tell you that the vast majority of MOOCs are not really open in the sense that he would like to see them be open, and that they would all have common free licenses and so forth. And so a lot of our authors are saying in order to be culturally sensitive, you need to make these materials open and that you can modify them so that they're more appropriate. Finally, another great chapter from South Africa, Laura Sinerswich, I never know how to pronounce her name, but she's a wonderful scholar from South Africa. And she talks about the need to put the content and the interactions in the hands of the local people, ownership of the local culture. And this, of course, is a debate that's going on internationally. I was at a symposium in Korea about this time last year on MOOCs, and that was one of the big topics, whether or not there should be, MOOCs should be taken from, say, Coursera or edX or whatever, developed in the United States and then just translated into Korean, or whether there needed to be a particular Korean model of MOOCs developed. And there was a big debate going on about that at this symposium there. And UNESCO has sponsored several events where they talk about should there be a culturally sensitive model for Southeast Asia or for South America or wherever, different areas of the world. So that's one of the big debates that's going on. So that's just a highlight of some of these issues. Now at this time we're going to throw it open to you. I'm going to give the microphone to Yadi and we will take your questions.
So actually, before we get that, I'd like for everyone to turn to someone next to you with the handout in your hand and for a couple of minutes discuss what we've said and what are in the handouts and questions that you might have related to what the authors are saying in that handout and what we've just said. See if someone next to you has the same question. That might give you more courage to ask your question for all of us. So if you're in the front row, turn around to people behind you or find someone next to you, just chat a bit about what's in that and what we had to say, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes. Thank you.
Remember, the best question will receive some of the books been published by Tom and edited by Tom and Kurt and Lee. So.
We'll give them the book at the end. Don't give them.
Yeah. Well, let's give him a few minutes.
Yeah. Okay, we'll give you another couple seconds. Make sure you have a good question.
If you're ready to ask your question, please let us know so we can bring the microphone to you.
So, what do you think? Interested? Who's interested in MOOCs now? Cultural sensitivity? Who's interested in that follow-up? Cultural sensitivity? Who would? Yeah. Okay. Great.
We have our first question here.
Question in the back. Yes.
Yes, I'm not sure whether this is a good question, but in chapter 15, there is the suggestion that never show the lecturer's face, use only audio. But my question is, how does the instructor will establish this connection with the students? Because we need to show presence. In my particular case, I would like to know who is behind that voice or that screen to establish a connection and identify with that person and make my learning more meaningful if I know who is that person. I'm a graduate student at Iowa State University.
Yes, thank you for your question. And you've actually hit on one of the big dilemmas that we face in this whole area is, you know, on the one hand, online learning research shows that teacher presence is absolutely a critical factor. On the other hand, some of the people involved in MOOCs are saying that we should remove the personalization aspect and make things more neutral so that they could be more easily adopted language-wise and culture-wise and so forth. So that is a great dilemma, and I really think, you know, I could not imagine myself teaching a MOOC, and I have taught a MOOC, but without my voice and my picture, maybe not necessarily moving video, but certainly people knowing who it is. I wouldn't feel like I really was engaged with the learners if I didn't do that. So I think that's a critical issue. Others want to comment on that?
Sure. Thank you for the question. And I think your question is also related to the chapter 9 in our book, where the author talks about more engaging content is more difficult to convert. So she's talking about how we should have more talking heads with minimal hand gestures as opposed to full body. So that definitely is sacrificing some engaging content. So that's you know, agreeing to what Tom just said, is the instructor's concern more of avoiding any cultural issues, and you know, talking about more easily convertible platforms as opposed to you know, increasing the engagement. So on chapter 19 chapter 20 we have Zoraini, who's from Indonesia and Malaysia, and she talks about moving from massive to now she's kind of more has more reservation for massiveness of it, and she's moving toward more of an just online open. So I think a lot of authors, our authors and ourselves share your concern, and we are still thinking about what are some of the ways. Thank you.
I have 3 quick responses to that question. It's an excellent question. How many of you have seen, and I'll be maybe culturally insensitive here, have seen the CNN show by Anthony Bourdain? He's got a cooking show. What's the name of it? Parts Unknown. So how many of you have seen that? Well, the person who wrote that chapter wants to be the next Anthony Bourdain. So he's writing about about less video. He's got more video than any of our authors, anyone who's ever done any video. So is my good friend Chuck a hypocrite or not? You know, I don't think so. What he's saying is that he's sensitive to the needs of people, and he's providing multiple ways for them to learn. But one way is to provide without the video so that they can get access to it. Because he's traveled the world doing videos with his students and putting them up on the web, student introductions to the course. He's got student mentors who have taken the class before with their video intros. So my answer partly is he has a video intro that's lovely to supplement. So, and our fourth member of our editing team, Tom Reynolds, sent us an email, and he said, you know, a lot of this issue about cultural sensitivity could be looked at in other ways that provide branching designs, some of which you might have options to go deeper. And he said that some people actually might like to be unbound once in a while from their culture and explore some things that normally they couldn't explore within their culture. So yeah, you know, so it's not necessarily to delete everything, but provide options and branching and that kind of thing. And I did a MOOC as well, and we did through Blackboard, the first one Blackboard ever did, and we stored and we saved the video streams of the weekly synchronous sessions, and they're available. They didn't have to go, but they're available. But it's a great question. We should probably go on to other ones. Up in the front, a couple questions were.
I'm Nick Rushby, and
I'm Yayoi Anzai from Japan.
it's a question that developed out of the conversation.
And Nick, can you tell people where you're from so they are aware of your background?
Well, I'm currently the editor of BJET. I stress currently.
British Journal of Educational Technology.
I thought that was obvious from the accent, or the lack of accent.
So,
And it's about that the question arises. A subjective observation is that in many subject areas, learning materials that are delivered in an American accent aren't that acceptable in the UK. But the reverse doesn't seem to hold. And that parlayed into the question from my colleague, which was...
My question was, why is culture important? I mean, when I looking at MOOCs, I feel like watching Hollywood movies. The value comes from America. And do you have any data that the learners who completed the courses comes from the English native speakers, for example?
It's interesting. Thank you both for those excellent questions. Yeah, it's interesting. The British accent, of course, is highly valued in all of our masterpiece theater shows and everything. They're often narrated by British experts and so forth. It always sounds more intelligent, doesn't it? You know, somehow than an American accent. But especially for a Southern accent. No, I'm sorry. I'm from Georgia. I get away with that. But you know, I had an interesting experience way back in 1985. I was making an interactive video disc program for the National Library of Medicine, and it was for nurses. And we had developed some wonderful, what we thought were wonderful programs and so forth. And they were narrated by a male voice, and we took it out for formative evaluation and showed it to some nurses, I remember, in Philadelphia. And they were unanimous in telling us, well, we don't want a male voice talking to us. We're tired. Doctors are all males. They're always talking down to us. We would like female narrators in the program. And so we went, and the good thing about interactive video disc in those days, you had 2 audio tracks. So it was fairly easy to go back and add a whole separate track with a female voice. Replicated everything in male and female voices. And one of the first options that people had when they went into the program, it said, would you prefer to have your learning delivered via male voice or female voice? 93% of the female nurses picked the male voice. So it was just totally counterintuitive to what the formative evaluation had told us. So yes, I think the issue, you know, you could look at it like a film, you know, and if you go to a movie from Hollywood, a big blockbuster, you know, that's going to be an American treatment. On the other hand, if you go to arts theater and you see a film from France with subtitles, that's going to be a whole totally different experience, and you know what you're getting. So it is. I think that's a very good point that you brought up. That maybe we're over compensating sometimes in these issues.
I just want to add just a small addition to that is that the Commonwealth of Learning out of Vancouver, they wrote 2 chapters in the book, one about open education quality and one about mobile MOOCs and for farmers in India and other people around the world to get access to contents in any way, shape, or form. They did make a comment about Hollywood movies in their response, despite trying to create content at the lowest common denominator. So it was kind of an interesting comment that they made in coming back to us. But one thing that they did say is to try and create a team that's multicultural, that's producing the course, so you have multiple perspectives looking at the course content being created. That was one of the comments on page 2 of your handout there under number 11. On the second page. So people were talking a bit about that, but it wasn't a common theme necessarily. It's an interesting point. Do we have a third question?
Yeah, we have a question here.
Hello, I am from Taiwan. So Dr. Reeves just gave an example about Taiwan's culture, and I think it's changing right now. The mother's boyfriend is changing right now. So cultural change. So why do we need to have a universal MOOC course? Why not just open source and then they can modify for their own culture? That's my first question. The second thing is we're talking about from the designer perspectives. How about the learner's perspectives? I'm asking about creating an online learning community through a MOOC course. Any chapter talking about this? An online learning community from different cultural backgrounds, something like that. If that would be a good idea, how are you going to incorporate that into MOOC course? Okay, thank you.
There's a person at Kyunghee University in Korea who talked a year ago about creating one culture MOOCs, because he said the Korean culture is not being addressed well enough by these English-dominated MOOCs. So that was kind of an interesting comment that he was making, and I think this will evolve. Coursera, for instance, has added translation teams. Coursera has added places where people can meet at common points, like New York Public Library or a certain place in Madagascar or Kenya, where people can come together to talk about cultural-related issues within the MOOC. So if you're talking about, how to diversify the MOOC, how to localize the MOOC, how to maybe even move away from the English dominance that we see happening here, these things are starting to be addressed. We're only kind of in the first or second wave of all this, so more will come. And I might have more to answer to this question after I hear from my other colleagues here on.
Yes, I think your question about culture changing, the first question, let me address that one. I think it's very interesting and important because that's the dilemma. We talk about culture in a way, it's not static and it's always changing, but when we talk about culturally specific, we have to talk about culture in some kind of way that's as if there's a unified culture of Taiwanese culture and Korean culture, and that's for the as for analysis or other issues, it's not possible to understand and talk about culture as fluid all the time. So I see a lot of Korean colleagues here, and if I talk about something that is what I consider whatever is the Koreanness, some of my friends might disagree. So it's always difficult. So I think that's an interesting and important issue, and I don't have an answer how to resolve it. Maybe one idea, if I were to offer a MOOC, I'll talk about probably kind of have a conversation at the beginning with the students about how we define culture and what it means to have a common language among ourselves. And so this is what I think about culture. This is how I feel about, am I going to be more concerned about offending anybody, so I'm going to remove all the cultural aspects, or I'm going to show my cultural bias and say whatever I present might be offensive to some people in 10,000, 5,000 audiences. So let me know if I'm doing it. So the culture could be part of the conversation, not only as an issues of contents. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I have a question here. Would you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Zhongrui Yao from Florida State University, and I have a problem with the language issue. And I remember you talking about providing dialects to local people, right? And I think like if you provide a dialect, for example, if you provide Chinese for the Chinese participants, so will you include the Chinese people in your instruction design team? If you include the Chinese people, so how can you make sure the translations of the dialects make sense to those international participants? For example, we developed a MOOC, and in that MOOC, we provided a discussion board in Chinese. But actually, according to the Chinese participants, the reflections and their feedback, they said they think those translations of discussion questions didn't make sense to them. So because to make sure the discussion questions in the different language discussion about others were exactly the same, so we cannot directly translate it from English to Chinese. So those translations didn't make sense to them. So my question is, how can we make sure the dialects we provided make sense to the local people? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's certainly a challenge. Thank you for your question. There are, I do a fair number of consultations with corporations who are developing not necessarily MOOCs, but online learning for international audiences. And they actually go out, there are companies that specialize in taking your e-learning and globalizing it. And they, it's not just translation. They actually go in and try to handle cultural issues and so forth. And I think they certainly would be good at eliminating the most egregious examples. But I'm a little doubtful that we can accommodate everything and everyone. When I was a graduate student back in the 70s, the big topic of those days was aptitude treatment interaction. And people like Cronbach and Snow were guiding people toward research and said that we would eventually be able to develop interactive multimedia programs that you would be able to put in your background, your interests, your aptitudes, your learning styles, all this sort of thing, and the program would adapt to those. And that never happened, and I don't think it ever will happen, frankly. I think that, we may have too high expectations for personalization. So I don't, frankly, it's definitely an issue, and you can eliminate the most egregious things. But last night I had dinner with someone from Taiwan, and I mentioned that our book on MOOCs was being translated into Chinese, and I thought she'd be happy about that. And she said, well, that won't really go over very big in she asked me where it was being translated, and I said in Shanghai, and she said, oh, well, that won't be useful in Taiwan. So me coming from the US, I thought, oh, Chinese is all the same. No, it's not. So it's an issue.
I think that question, I think about it a lot, because one of the research project that I'm doing is we are looking at about 650 responses from MIT MOOC users, or the people who are on the listserv. And being a quality researcher, I read all their open-ended questions in my spare time for fun. And it's interesting because when we ask about the challenges and the suggestions they are asking or making, it's pretty much, if you read it, they're asking MOOCs not to be MOOCs. And in some ways, they're asking things like, oh, I want more interaction with the instructor, and I want all the resource materials. So the students who are taking MOOCs, although they like the free and openness of it, they are asking the instructor to do kind of things that I would be able to do with my 20 doctoral students for a whole semester, which is completely unfair, right? But I think MOOCs has been popular and has gotten a lot of attention, and a lot of people have a lot to say about MOOCs. So it's kind of now, it's like, as Tom said, we are, as users and learners, we are having a very unrealistic expectation of what MOOCs was supposed to be at the beginning. So yeah, it doesn't really answer your question, but I think it's my way of saying that I share your concerns, and maybe we should kind of let MOOCs be MOOCs as it should be or it was supposed to be, and not asking it to be something that is more or different than it is not.
And just a couple of quick things. One, you could have a crowdsourced activity, where someone might get recognized for being a leader of a team to make it more localized. So there might be ways to create some kind of recognition reward structures or some kind of thing like that. Now, in our special issue, we have a piece or a chapter from Dr. Ke Zhang from Wayne State about MOOCs and social media use in China. So you might want to get a copy of this too, whoever asked that question. We'll try and give you one of these to read. The book is being translated by South China Normal University. East China Normal is going to be publishing it. As Tom said, that's simplified Chinese. That's not traditional Chinese. So Taiwan will have to get, hopefully someone in the audience here can translate it to traditional Chinese. Thank you. We have time for one or two more questions.
Yes, we have one question here from.
I'm just curious, I didn't hear anything really about MOOCs as a force for a sort of cultural change. Like, for example, I went to a wedding this summer, but it was two men. It was a gay wedding. And so from what I've heard, I shouldn't mention that in my MOOC. But that to me is saying, hey, there are other cultures that are really horrible and abusive to gay people. I should modify my content to support cultures that are horrible and abusive to gay people. So I'm just curious, about MOOCs as cultural, as forces of cultural change, and realistically where that line is. That there's nothing wrong with two men getting married, and so therefore, hopefully, if somebody in a culture that is really oppositional to that idea and feels that gay men should be executed, like in some places in the world, maybe including that content in my MOOC could be a positive force of change. I'm just curious if you had any ideas sort of about MOOCs as that kind of force in global culture.
Good point, Ed. Would you introduce yourself?
Oh, I'm Ed Schneider from Ithaca College.
Thanks, Ed. There is something new called a GROOC, G-R-O-O-C. It's related to creating MOOCs for social change, group related, trying to create community-based changes. And that was announced about a month ago. Maybe it's Johns Hopkins or somewhere out east. So that's one answer. The second is the World Bank. Their MOOCs are really about climate change and poverty and all this. So it relates to cultural and social issues and trying to get a mass of people to understand what some of these gigantic issues that we face. The third answer is that my colleagues at Purdue University, Sonny Watson and Bill Watson, have a MOOC that they just studied and analyzed related to the sex slave trade. There's a word for that, but they tried making people more aware of the problem that exists. And as I read the article, they had people from the porn industry participate in that MOOC that raised issues that others weren't considering about their own livelihood and how they make money. So there's a lot of issues that may come out in a MOOC that might not come out in a normal class. And I don't want to speak fully for that's their research and it's just in review. But those are three examples of cultural and social things that I'm aware of. But GROOCs is a new topic or area. And if I had my computer here, I'd call it up and find out where that's from. But you can write me an email and I'll find that.
I just want to thank you. I think we are running out of time. And I just want to thank the panel for joining us. Discussing the MOOC, and also they give us a most pragmatic and comprehensive and diverse view of MOOCs. And I think if you read this book, it gives an in-depth understanding of history, the practice of cultural inclusion, delivery of content tools, and current state and possible future MOOCs. So again, we are not solving all the problems here, but it's a great start. And if you read the book, you really have a better understanding how this book is going to change your way of looking at teaching online education. Thank you for joining us.
And finally, if you asked a question, come up and get a book. If you didn't ask a question, we're going to give away 10 special issues to the first 10 people that come up that didn't ask a question. So, but who asked the question? I think we have 6 or 7 people getting books here. So if you asked a question, if you could line up over here. If you didn't ask a question, if you could line up and you want one of those 10 special issues, Mimi will give out the books. I'll give away the special issues.
Thank you very much for joining us.